You could do that during comments, right? Are we live? All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on a Friday night, and thank you, virtual audience, for watching us. This is an historic occasion. A local author, judge known as Jet, Joel Erik Thompson, has written a book called The Bentley Barrister. You will notice that the Lincoln Lawyer probably was an antecedent, but as I understand it, Michael Connolly said it was okay if you used this title. So Joel was trying to remember how many years. We turned 35 in October. So how many years do you think you've actually been shopping here?
At least 34.
Long time ago. This is our third store. So he would have originally come to the little store over on, and as I never intended the bookstore to be a business. I mean, it's just it still is for me, just a hobby. We were in a little tiny space over on Main Street across from Mali's, but then we keep moving this way. But we've been here since 1999, and unless they decide to build more condos all around us, we'll probably stay here. Will be interesting to see what the new Scottsdale City Council does, because I understand they're more conservative and less inclined to green light all kinds of development projects. So we'll see. I'm hopeful. Anyway, Joel, why don't you tell us your background, because that's probably critical to the idea of writing a legal thriller.
Oh, well, let's see. For starters, I was a trial lawyer and a judge. I tried about 400 major criminal cases, including 12 death penalty murder trials. Never had a client executed.
That's right there. That's an achievement, right?
I moved to Phoenix in the mid-'70s. Been customer of yours for, if not 35 years, pretty close to it. And a nice piece of trivia, my beautiful wife out there, our first date almost 25 years ago was to a book signing in this store at her insistence. I was already planning to come here, but she said, well, I have to stop first and pick up a book. So,
well, that was a good ground for marriage right there. Yeah,
she obviously has very good taste. But obviously, I've spent a great deal of time in a courtroom. I was always intrigued by the story behind what went on in a courtroom. And I've done a lot of reading in my life. I think I was teasing you before about the fact that, to the best I can count, I have about 400 author-signed books that came from this store along the way, all of which I've read, or almost all of them at least. But the periods of time between major trials, I mean, I traveled a lot too. I did a lot of lecturing in the legal community. I tried cases literally in courtrooms coast to coast, border to border. I've appeared in the U.S. Supreme Court. One of my neighbors when I got to Phoenix, I had three intriguing neighbors. Directly kind of across the canal was a very interesting lady named Sandra Day O'Connor. Got to visit with her in her later job. But I also got to try, as close as I can remember, either 3 or 4 jury trials in front of her when she was a Maricopa County trial judge.
Wow.
Which is a rare thing for higher up appellate judges.
I only know her from Stanford alumni events here in the Valley.
Yeah.
We used to.
My other two neighbors were Barry Goldwater and John McCain. So it was an interesting street to live on.
So, as you know, and as I know from my courtroom experience, very often it's just the best story that wins. Juries can ignore facts, can even ignore scientific evidence, and I think a trial lawyer has to become a real storyteller. And so it's not surprising that you would have,
I was comfortable there.
Right. However, interestingly enough, while many, many lawyers have written legal thrillers, there's only a handful of judges ever that have actually written one. There's one British judge who wrote under a pseudonym called Cyril Hare. And there were 2 administrative judges, one in Michigan. The guy, I always go blank on names here, but in the 70s, Anatomy of a Murder. That
Okay.
was Robert, what was his name? Robert something. And then another man named William Coughlin, who was a Michigan administrator, and he wrote a legal series. But judges almost never. Thank you, Robert Travers. Right, that was an Anatomy. Patrick
Got a
is
young
my,
memory
is
back
my
there in the
memory.
back.
I know. See, here's my theory. As you get old, and I am old, what happens is that there's just so much stuff your retrieval system slows down, because I wouldn't be able to recall it if I'd actually forgotten it. Right? It just takes longer to get to it. So Patrick often shortcuts that process and pops out.
Yeah.
When we do Zoom events, he uses the chat feature. It's very helpful. I'll be going, and all of a sudden it will pop up. So anyway, I find it interesting that that you decided to write a legal thriller, because it is really rare for a judge to do that.
Well, I wanted to do one thing a little bit differently. I didn't want the focus to be on the trial. I wanted to write a book about a courtroom lawyer who happened to make his living in a courtroom, because I thought that was always the better story. I mean, I never went in my social life in all the years I was a courtroom lawyer and judge. I didn't meet somebody and say, "Oh, God, let me tell you about the really great trial I just got through doing," because,
Hey, there's such a thing as judicial discretion. You're not actually supposed to do that.
yeah, but even if it was over, you just you don't want to talk to them about what you do for a living. That's tedious. It's what I do every day. Let's talk about something interesting. Let's talk about you. So I was much better company than I would have been otherwise, I think. I've been surrounded by some very interesting ladies. Married 4 of them. Got dumped by 3 of them, but that's beside the point. They got lost in the demands of my courtroom time and energy, I think.
Lawyers make very poor husbands, as I'm told, right? And in my case, maybe wife. But anyway, so now I have a bookstore, so I don't have to even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So I read the law. I am one of the last remaining people who didn't go to law school but actually read the law. But when you do that, you're only allowed to practice law in the state that you read the law in. In my case, it was Virginia. So when I came to Arizona, I would have had to go to law school to get a standing to take the Arizona bar, and I thought a bookstore would be a whole lot more fun. And it turns out that it is. But I have to say that a legal background has been excellent training for running a business.
Sure.
Very few small business owners actually think ahead like lawyers.
Well, you also spent a lot of time in the Library of Congress, if I remember.
Yes, I was a librarian there before.
Yes.
Right. But anyway, this is not about me. This is about you. And I do find it interesting that your protagonist is called Colum Arbuthnot Taylor, known as Cat. Now, do you think there's a parallel between Jet and Cat? Surely there is.
Well, yeah, sort of. But the Jet's kind of interesting. That was not my nickname as a kid growing up much. When I was a judge in Maricopa County, I was kind of late to the game. I was not an elected judge. As you know, Arizona has a unique pro tem judge. Basically, the judges elect you to fill in when they need a warm body. And when we got to the electronic era of emails, there was already a Judge Howard Thompson. So they couldn't send an email to Judge Thompson because it would go to him. So they had to come up with something next for me. So I became Judge Jet, my initials. And the initials just sort of hung on since they spelled something,
That's true. It does make much more sense. But cleverly enough, Colum Arbuthnot Taylor also spelled something, right? Cat.
That was more purposeful. It also happens to have my big brother's middle name that they share, Arbuthnot, which is my Scottish family heritage name, for what that's worth. But it's been an interesting adventure. I have always read a great deal. I read extremely fast. When I got out of my undergraduate degree was engineering. When I got out of engineering school, I read a lot of stuff that I'd would never want to tell anybody I'd ever read, and tried to forget. But I wanted to read for my own enjoyment, and it was in an era where speed reading became the thing, and there were techniques that you could do to speed read, and I became extremely proficient at that. I mean, I could virtually read a page about as long as it would take to turn to the next page. I mean, it was scary. I could read a book easily in an hour or so before going to bed within maybe 2 nights. So I went through books in abundance and across a wide range of things. I didn't go to school to become a lawyer. I literally got a job out of high school as a draftsman at Bell Laboratories, that magical place where they're inventing transistors and lasers and things like that. They sent me to engineering school and paid for it. Then they sent me to law school and paid for it. And all of a sudden, I was a patent lawyer and realized I can't do this the rest of my life. I would much rather be a lawyer in a courtroom, and here I are.
Excellent. So it's not unusual to have a protagonist whose life gets derailed by a traumatic event. So you decided to use that particular trope here to get Cat out of the sports world and into the legal world.
To me, it was a nice transition where he didn't have any choice. He couldn't say, no, I'm going back to court, really. Physically.
Tell us what happened to him.
Well,
I was trying not to talk
okay, well,
talk for you here, so you do it.
Literally. The first character in my book is familiar. A guy named Rudy. Long ago, I actually knew Rudy. He and I used to lecture together even. And I got permission to use his name in my book. But I've lost my train of thought there. But the idea was that the book opens in a hospital. The protagonist, Cat, has just been in a horrific car crash which killed both of his children and essentially brain injured his wife, who will never really leave an institution where she's cared for. He survives, but obviously his football career is gone. The drunk in the car driving without headlights the wrong way on the highway made sure. So where does he go from there? Well, in the off seasons, he'd been going to law school. So law's the obvious place to go. The obvious thing for him to have as clients are other athletes. I've represented a number of professional athletes along the way. There's a scene in my book about going into the office of the commissioner of football in New York, and what it took to get from the lobby into that office was about a 20-minute process that, I could break out of prison quicker than I could have broken into there. But I've been there, done that on behalf of a client, trying to plead with them, please don't suspend my poor guy. And I have found I have some beautiful friends and relatives out here. Everybody has always asked me, what are you working on lately? They were always much more interested in what I was doing for a living than I was after I left the courtroom. You create a mindset defensively. I don't want to take this home. I want to leave it there. It'll be there in the morning when I come back to it. All my friends say, what are you working on now? It was always the topic of major social discussion. And I thought, if everybody else wants to hear about this, I probably ought to write it out. I wouldn't have to keep telling the same stories to different people. And here I am.
Here you are, right. So, partly this is a survival story. How would you ever recover from having your children killed and your wife the fact that he has lost his sports career is actually minor compared to the things that happened to everybody else.
Well, and I didn't really have it in perspective. I was talking to a lady publicist recently who for a Christian publication. And I told her the subject matter of my book, and I said, I don't really think that's a good Christian publishing company book about a guy who's in trial on a biracial rape murder trial. And she said, no, you don't understand. I read the book. I like the character. Here's a guy who's abundantly wealthy, able to do anything in the world he would want to do, and he lives absolutely on the straight and narrow. He made a vow to his wife, till death do us part. He's not changing. She's maybe in an institution and dysfunctional intellectually, but she's still alive, and he's still married. And it wasn't something that was a specific idea of mine to do. It just seemed appropriate in my internal characterization of this person, that he's just not a guy who compromises anything much. Okay. And but to realize that somebody who read my book and was a professional in the business focused on that was heartwarming.
So why did you pick Notre Dame as his undergraduate college? I mean, it's a football factory. I know that because I grew up in Chicago, and so there we all were, right next door.
You asked about my background. A longtime friend is a guy that the world calls Rudy. I know his real name, and I got permission from him to put him in my book. He and I, once upon a time, used to do lecture programs together. The last one that I remember doing, I have a photo of us lecturing in Las Vegas on my 56th birthday, so that was a couple of years back. But I put Rudy there because I wanted to catch the reading public's attention right away. Rudy, oh, they know Rudy. Oh, yeah, that guy, he's in a hospital, and his best friend is maybe gonna die, and they don't know what to do. Oh my God, oh my God. So now that I have your attention, let's talk about what happens thereafter. I wanted to have the attention of my reader right up on that first line.
So now that that's all the background, what is the actual plot? If this is a mystery, it's required.
Oh, well, the plot is that he's a courtroom lawyer. He's involved in a very ugly jury trial. It's a biracial rape murder jury trial. He represents the person accused of the initial jury trial, which is just a murder trial. But it's a racial thing in a bar room. A black kid is basically stabbed to death, and the white kid is charged with it, and Cat's representing him, and he insists nobody understood what really happened. And that's where the whole thing comes into play. How do you educate that jury up there they're already preconditioned. I mean, they know what the charge is. They've heard the prosecutor's opening statement, and they ought to be outraged at what they've been told. Of course, the prosecutor wasn't there, but then Cat wasn't either. So you come down to these two competing stories. What's the story behind the apparent story, and which one's more credible? How do you persuade a jury? Throw in another mix. Cat, before he became a professional athlete, well, obviously was a athlete growing up. Well, he grew up in the town where this trial is going to take place, and the guy on the other side of the football field growing up was that guy who's now the judge in this trial. And they don't like each other at all. And that becomes clear along the way. How do you mix that into the conflict between the obvious of a guy saying, no, I was there when that guy was killed, but I wasn't trying to kill him, I was trying to save his life. Well, the prosecutor doesn't know the background of the client the way Cat knows. Cat knows this jury needs to find out a lot more about the guy they've accused. And that's his trial strategy, is how do I educate our jury to the breadth of the character that they're making a judgment about. He's not as simple as he appears. Just a white guy who took exception to a black guy being in a white guy's, biker bar kind of thing.
So one thing we know is that eyewitness testimony is often completely unreliable. And especially in moments of stress, people don't, what they see may not be, in fact, what's really going on. So if you have witnesses, presumably, to this fight.
Well, mix in one other thing, a topic that's in quite recent days, after I finished writing my book, thank you very much, they've gone very public with the idea, how come police officers who are trained and carry wonderful communication equipment, how come they don't always turn it on when they get out of the car? That's the problem in this case. The police are called to this scuffled fight in the bar, and when they go in the front door, they see the client, Cat's eventual client, on the floor with this guy who's been stabbed. They presume he stabbed him. Well, no other witnesses. Where do you go from there? You hire a really good lawyer.
Well, I mean, the defense is always on the back foot. The prosecution generally has the advantage, and that
Sure.
for many people think that if a person is actually brought to trial, they must be guilty. There's just enough. I don't know. The world's so turned upside down at the moment. Maybe respect for authority has gone out the door. But anyway, it's a harder row for the defense to overcome the prosecution than it is for the prosecution to battle the defense.
Well, I'm not sure I have an objective opinion, but I absolutely agree with you.
My first trial, when I was a baby lawyer and didn't know what I had to qualify 35 FBI expert witnesses in a bank trial. And it all turned out at the end that what a lot of these people thought they saw wasn't. So,
True.
You just learn.
Well, and one of the things that we, the folks outside the courtroom don't take into enough account, jurors don't, I think, come to appreciate at some point, many of them. You're talking about very high energy, high emotional events. We're not level-headed, sedate observers of what's going on. If you're a witness, this is an emotional event that you experienced, you internalized it. How did you store it? How accurately did you perceive it? How much of what you think you saw is what you expected and not what you observed? Those are the kind of things that I felt as a lawyer, I wanted to give the jury the opportunity to see my observation. I wasn't there. I have read the reports of everybody who talked to the police or anything that's been written down. I talked to my client candidly, and I get to decide whether he's going to be a good witness, because if I don't think he's going to tell the truth, I'm not going to put him up there. I don't want to compound my challenge. But how do you make that credible to a jury? That if your government put that paid police officer, that 32-year police detective, and all of his background and training and who he's taught for 32 years on the job, put him on a stand under oath to tell the truth, he's probably not going to make up something about your client who he's never met before, has no reason to dislike. So how do you undo those presumptions? That's the challenge.
is. So how much do you want to delve into the jury? Because, the phrase from the French means, what is it, voir dire, to see and, what is it, to see and to tell? Something like
To
that.
see and say, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So jury selection is a hugely important part of a trial, and both sides try to put people on the jury they think will listen or be sympathetic and keep people off they think will be prejudiced. It's very difficult. So the composition of a jury is a critical part.
Yeah, I know from my own perspective, I didn't look for jurors that I thought would be anti-cop or that would swallow whatever we threw out there. I always felt if I can't convince my client that he's got no business going to trial, we better get some kind of a plea worked out. If there's a triable case, what do I have to do to put that in a context to this jury where it's not only, yeah, I guess it's credible. I want it to be the most reasonable thing for them to say, well, I can understand how the defendant would do that, and I can see why this cop who's running in the door, who's been told there's this horrible melee going on inside, would run in the door all energized and so forgetful they didn't even remember to turn on their body camera. Now I got something to work with.
So not all jury
I don't have to prove that he's innocent.
No, you don't.
Just that they didn't prove he's guilty.
Okay. So that's the story then. The trial proceeds, and it's a question, is this Perry Mason, or is this going to be, there's sort of a presumption when you read a legal thriller from the point of the defense that the client is going to turn out to be innocent. It almost always goes that way. Very occasionally, there was a very good, did you all watch The Lincoln Lawyer? Okay, remember the second one where he has a client, a woman who looks really guilty, and he eventually wins through and gets her off, but in the process realizes that she has committed a much worse crime. And so he is able to convict her for that, even though he can't, she was, I think, in fact, innocent of the crime she was being tried for. But there are all kinds of rules. Bob Dugoni, whom you know and who has endorsed your work, has written some really interesting books about the ethics of trial lawyers. And he had a woman named, what's her name? Kira Dugan, who in the first book had a nearly impossible defendant, and it all worked out. But in the second book, her client is actually guilty, and she still has to defend him, and that is a different row. So if I remember right, a lawyer can only break client confidentiality if he thinks that the client is going to commit a future crime, right? You can't do anything about what you learn from representing them, but if you suspect that they are going to commit a new crime,
well,
I think that's right. Not if they're in prison,
future
obviously.
Conduct is not covered by attorney-client privilege,
Right.
so it's not a privileged communication. If you don't necessarily have to put a name on it either, but if you tell them, you better make sure that back door is locked. There are always borderline issues in any occupation. Certainly, law among the many of them. It's so easy to get drawn into the conflict and the discussion and forget, there's parameters that I can't cross.
Right. Yeah, I've always thought it'd be sort of an interesting premise for a legal thriller would be you don't see it all that often that in the end the lawyer has to work to prevent this person. If he gets them off and they get out, they're going to do something worse.
Yeah. Well, the typical question I get on a social level is, what do you do if your client tells you he did what he's charged with, but he doesn't want to take a plea? Well, obvious answer. I represent him. I go to trial. What I
still entitled.
know is not what is relevant. On the other hand, there are limits in what I can do in a courtroom or just intellectually. I'm not going to lie on his behalf. I can point out the limitations in the testimony, the evidence that the prosecution has presented, and why they haven't met their burden. They have to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm just here with reasonable doubt.
Well, how about questions? I think we can't say much more about what happens in the book without making it no point in your buying it and reading it. So we don't want to do that. So, Joel, why don't you take questions?
Sure. Who's got a question? Are you all spellbound?
You all know how it came out, right? So, okay, it's a rigged audience.
Highlight the second book.
What about the second book? Second book is a continuation. I wanted to write the last thing you, the reader, would expect. Let's put Cat. Cat lives in the same build. He built the building that his office is in. His residences are on the top floors, and the top of this building has a flat roof with his outside garden on it. And he's up there just in the middle of the ugly night, restless because he's got 1,000 things on his mind, and the phone rings. Who's the last person in the world you'd expect would call him in the ungodly hour of the night? The judge from the trial in the book we were just talking about, who they have fought since they were, knee high, really don't like each other. In the trial in Bentley Barrister, it's the trial when the trial is televised live because Cat's star status with the media. The judge and Cat get into a dispute about something have to do with the case, and they're chattering back and forth, and the judge basically says, one more word out of your mouth, I'm going to hold you in contempt, and I'm going to fine you for every word. Do you have any question about that? Well, Cat wants to be sure of things here, so he has, just one question. I'm a little short on funds. Do you consider asshole one word or two? Obviously, they don't get along real well. Book 2, he's up on the roof. Phone rings in the middle of the night. Cat, this is Judge. Yeah? I need you to get over to the jail right away. There's a hearing. Cat's answer. I don't have anything on the calendar or at the jail. No, you don't understand. I just got arrested. I need you to come over and represent me. Seriously? Yeah, as serious as it gets. They're charging me with vehicular manslaughter. You got to get here right now. What's Cat going to do? Curious internal mystery.
Well, he doesn't have to take the client, right?
Doesn't have to. What does he gain if he does?
Question. The name of the book, it resembles the Lincoln Lawyer. How did you come up with the name?
Oh, the Lincoln Lawyer. Short story. I know Michael Connelly. I mean, not intimately, but I know him well enough. I used to tease him that when he was writing books after Lincoln Lawyer came out and became a big movie and all that, I said, you're missing the logical next title. You got, I come from my dad was in the advertising business. You gotta go upgrade. You gotta go with the Bentley Barrister. And he said, no. And I would tease him when I saw him. And finally he said, I don't want to hear any more about it. If there's ever going to be a book called The Bentley Barrister, you better write it. If I have any right title or interest in that title, it's my gift to you. But there's one condition. You better put it on a damn good book. Now, the footnote to that, Michael Connelly happened to be in, not in the bookstore, because he draws a hell of a lot bigger crowd than I do. It had to be in a church where there were enough seats. But when I had him sign my book, I reminded him about that, and I said, the Bentley Barrister's coming out. Remember you told me it had to be on a damn good book? Mission accomplished. Thanks for blazing the trail. So I've been very blessed with the lawyers who became writers. Conley was a reporter who did the crime beat, but Robert Degoni, when he knew had finally written the book I kept saying I was going to write, he demanded that he got to write the back cover, which he did, and blew me away. What he compared it to. He compared it to John Grisham's Time to Kill, which was really truly in some ways the first book that inspired me to, I'm going to write a book. That was obviously quite a long time ago, but it's set. Here I am.
Anybody else? You opened your mouth. No? Now it's you I'm looking at. No? You were just signing.
No?
All right. Anybody else? Well, in that case, I thank you all very much for coming this evening. If you would like to have Joel sign a copy of your book, although I suspect most of you already have it, judging from this crowd. But anyway, thank you very much for coming and for your attention. Virtual audience, thank you so much. So talk to Joel, take a photo, get your book signed, and have a safe trip home.
Yeah. Be on the lookout for the judicial restraints.